Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Apartheid Museum. And happy Freedom Day to all South Africans. We also say a warm welcome to our television audience on eNCA this afternoon. We are going to be looking at a very critical question, a quarter of a century into democracy, into that after that democratic breakthrough in 1994. Beyond the right to vote, what does freedom consist of? What is the best conceptualization of freedom? How do we measure whether we are truly free? What do the empirical data tell us about the extent to which we are free or not? Where are the gaps between the vision and the free society and the realities and the various kinds of unfreedoms today? Who should take the blame for these gaps? Looking toward the future, where to from here to avoid the pitfalls of the first 25 years of democracy. So the question we're asking this afternoon is freedom, true freedom, likely within our lifetime? And I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce two wonderful debaters and public figures. I have on my left Dr. Blade Nzimande, who is also the Transport Minister, but also the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party. And then on my right, I have author, broadcaster, and public intellectual Eusebius McKaiser, who's also the host of the Eusebius McKaiser Show. I'm going to start off by asking Dr. Nzimande to, in 7 minutes, talk to us about how free we truly are after 25 years of democracy in South Africa. Dr. Nzimande.
Thank you, Karima, and also let me greet Eusebius, and of course the viewers and the listeners at home, and join you to wish everybody a happy Freedom Day, and the audience here. Let me put it this way. Firstly, that as a country, 25 years since 1994, we really have made enormous strides, historic, and judging ourselves even by where we come from, we have actually done very important things. But let me start by saying this, because that's going to be my anchor, that the most critical foundations laid by this, immediate foundations, after a long struggle against colonialism and apartheid, was firstly the battle we won, those of us who were fighting against apartheid, for the constitution to be drafted by an elected constituent assembly. Very important. Secondly, the actual elections in 1994 themselves, very significant foundation, and the constitution that we adopted in 1996. Now, also, the nature of that constitution also reflects the role of the working class significantly, because we've got very progressive labor laws, the right to organize, to join a trade union, and improve basic conditions of employment, at least on paper. But also we have done things that have been very important. We have got now about 17 million people on social grants. Some people are cynical about that. Social grants, by the way, are not necessarily for the unemployed, are people who are not working, which is important in the context of the poverty that we have. We have electrified 7 million households. It's more now. It's 2014 figures. It's a very interesting comparison, for instance, Karima, because in 20 years, if we count 1994 to 2014, it's 7 million electrified households. Between 1894 and 1994, a century before that, we had electrified only 5 million households. So in 20 years, we did more than what this country did in a century in terms of electrification. By the way, I might as well quickly just make an example. I finished my master's thesis in a paraffin lamp in the 1980s, in the early 1980s. I did not know growing up in a mud house that you can actually connect electricity in a mud house. It was only the ANC which came with that. We thought that there can be no electricity. Education today, we're talking about 1.6 million students who have benefited from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme in higher education. Basic education, more than 80% of no-fee schools, with at least a meal per day in all the schools. Now, this is very important, you know, these achievements. But also, I don't want them to say, because of this, by the way, it's the achievements of the ANC government. I don't believe any other government would have done this. I want to put this up front. And Eusebius, I'm looking forward to debating you also about that, you know?
It's going to get hot in here.
But I want to say that this does not mean that we do not have huge challenges. Some of the challenges, for instance, we have is that we still have a long way to go. And there are certain errors also that I'm prepared to admit today that we did. From the standpoint of the SACP, I can tell you, we made a mistake by adopting neoliberal policies in the mid-1990s. Also, the other bigger mistakes that we've made is what now the SACP characterization as state capture, you know. Now, that is why, therefore, we agree. The ANC says we now need a second, more radical phase, because the things I've outlined, we can say it was like the first phase of our democracy. Now, these things that we haven't addressed, unless we address them, they threaten to actually roll back the gains that we've actually made. And I'm saying this also against the background that, having said all this, one definition of freedom for us is that freedom is not delivered in a wheelbarrow to people. Freedom has to be fought for, and people have to participate. Just like under apartheid, yes, we were victims at one level of apartheid, but our people refused to be victims. That's why they struggled and fought and won this freedom. Now, it didn't end in 1994. We need now to make sure that our people continue to create and expand the boundaries of the freedom that we already have.
Thank you, Minister. You can see I'm a radio producer. I'm a time Nazi. I showed the Minister time, and luckily he's been interviewed so many times he knows when to wrap. Let me introduce Eusebius McKaiser, author, public intellectual, broadcaster, and of course also my colleague at 702, the host of the Eusebius McKaiser Show.
Thank you, Karima. Good afternoon, Dr. Blade Nzimande, the viewers at home, all my media colleagues who are here. Thank you so much for coming to cover this event. I know there are many events going on today. And most importantly, thank you to the people in the room. I don't know if you're at home, whether you can see, whether you've had a panning of the shot yet, but there are particularly many young people in the room. And I want to start off firstly by acknowledging you and asking you self-indulgently, please give yourself a round of applause for coming out on Freedom Day. I was tempted to cheat in this debate because Dr. Nzimande has quite a sharp blade. So I thought that perhaps before the debate I should give him one of his favorite beverages, a glass of red wine, and secretly put blood in it so that there's too much blood that may be in his alcohol. But I was covered because I saw him munching a little bit earlier on some hot cross buns. But that notwithstanding, I'm looking forward to engaging the Minister. I've got a lot to say about the substance of the claims that he has made, but I'm going to be fair on him and make some positive argument of my own in the allotted 5 minutes that I have left. And only in the second bite, when Karima gives me another chance, will I directly respond to each of the claims that he has made. But I thought what might be useful is for me to tell you what I think about the topic. The position I'm going to take on the question, are we truly free, is that we are not truly free. The slightly longer answer is that we have made enormous strides since 1994. We shouldn't be glib and ahistorical about what we achieved when we defeated the apartheid edifice. However, we also shouldn't romanticize 1994. And one of the nice things about being younger, I'm not that young anymore, but I wasn't old enough to vote in 1994, I turned 40 a couple of weeks ago, is that sometimes as younger South Africans, we can be very ungrateful about what the likes of Karima or Dr. Nzimande did for us collectively as a society, but sometimes we are also usefully, psychologically distant from the past and can be dispassionate about how true we really are. So I want to make a couple of points. Firstly, what does freedom mean to me? Freedom cannot only be defined in terms of political freedom. When ANC politicians talk about freedom and they want to remind you that we are truly free, what they usually mean by that is that we have regular, free and fair elections. They talk about political freedom. I don't think that that conception of freedom is good enough, because political freedom means nothing to someone who's sitting in Alex who doesn't have a home. Political freedom means nothing to a woman who can't jog at 5 in the morning because she might be raped. Political freedom means nothing to a woman like Karima who can't jog past a construction site without being catcalled by men who are misogynistic. Political freedom means nothing to the young people in this room with uniforms on who are at school, the schools that Dr. Blade Nzimande is so proud of, but who at the end of matric may not be able to slot into the economy because the economy isn't as democratic as our elections. So what do I mean by freedom? I mean by freedom economic freedom, social freedom. I mean the opportunity to live a life that is filled with flourishing, not just the ability to go to elections every 5 years. And I think we need to be expansive in our definition of freedom. If we then look at the stats, how free are we truly? Well, he is right. We indeed have achieved a lot. There are many communities, which is something the opposition parties, Dr. Nzimande, Karima and I agree on this, often forget. There are many communities that have no clinics, for example, no ambulances, no police services. And when your baseline is absolute degradation because of the lack of services that were not provided by the apartheid government, then of course 25 years later there's a lot to be grateful for in the many ways in which you are free. But I'm afraid there are many unfreedoms that we have to confront as South Africans. There are many unfreedoms. For me, the most important is how undemocratic and how racist the structure of our economy remains. And the people who are the worst losers are the poor black majority, the very ones that the ANC pretend they are in service of when they describe themselves as a multi-class formation. But in reality, we have an ANC-led government that is actually middle-class and anti-poor and anti-black. The question then becomes, who's responsible for this? And I'll come back to this later because I've only got a minute left for my opening statement. Where I would agree in part implicitly with the Minister's opening statement is that any sober structural analysis of where we've gone wrong can't begin and end with the state. I've got to ask myself, if I really am an ally of women, if I am a feminist father, what am I doing to raise my son to not be catcalling, for example? I have agency. If I'm a CEO, if I'm a white 60-year-old CEO, what am I doing to reduce income inequality in my company? So we can't be state-centric only when we talk about who is responsible for the unfreedoms. We are all collectively implicated in the unfreedoms. I'm afraid, however, and we can debate this shortly, the lion's share of the blame, Karima, must go to the state. The state has a monopoly on policy. The state has a monopoly on lawmaking. The state has a monopoly on collecting our taxes and deciding how to disburse it. The state has a monopoly on force. So, of course, the lion's share of the blame goes to the state. And a little bit later, I want to talk, looking forward, to the question, what can we do? But in the first instance, it pains me to say this because many racists will love me saying this, but I'm saying it from a position of love. We are not, Dr. Nzimande, a country that can really be described as truly free.
Thank you so much to my two participants. Eusebius McKaiser, who's just finished. And of course, immediately the contradictions are with us. And it's through contradictions that we actually get progress. So, Dr. Nzimande, I'd like you to respond specifically to Eusebius's concept of unfreedoms, and particularly the focus on the economy, and the dichotomy between the fact that, yes, the state is actually responsible for the lion's share of the problems because they have the monopoly on power, but we also have actors in the economy that have sacked the 25 years out. And I'd like you to marry those two in getting to how unfree the economy still remains.
There are a number of things that I agree with from what Eusebius has said, Karima, but also there are a number of things that I disagree with. Maybe let me pick up on those so that we have a good debate. Firstly, Eusebius, is very interesting. You say the state almost doesn't matter on the one hand, you know. People can't just rely on the state and so on. But then when it comes to blaming them, almost the biggest slice of the blame is on the state. That's usually the problem I have with liberals. I always say this, you know, because
I was waiting for that.
They've got this unclear thing about what the state Yes, the state is not everything, but the state is important. That's why also we are conceding that point. It can be important in some instances and in others not. Secondly, by the way, we also need to critique the notion of just looking at the state. Let me tell you, Karima, as the SACP, one way we are describing 1994 is that the ANC government was largely given an unfunded mandate. We have a beautiful constitution. We're proud of it. I was part of those who negotiated it. But an unfunded mandate in terms of the things we have to address: poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Who was responsible for that? It was the apartheid state, yes, but it was the capitalist class in South Africa. What did the capitalist class do? From 1994, at the time when this ANC government needed all the resources, they delisted. In the first 10 years of our democracy, about 20 to 25% of our GDP left the country and listed in the New York and the London stock exchanges by the very same people whose legacy the ANC government was supposed to be dealt with. So it's very important that we don't just look at the state, but also we look at capital, who were the biggest beneficiaries of the pre-1994 dispensation. That's why also I would differ with Eusebius. It's not just only the state. It's primarily those who were accumulating beforehand. But no one disagrees with the fact that, as I have said, we still have lots of challenges. And the reason why the ANC and the SACP says a second phase of the transition, let's focus on economic transformation. I agree. Our freedom will always remain incomplete for as long as we are not economically emancipated. But then economic emancipation, you can't just put it solely on the state without also looking at who were the beneficiaries who also continue to be the primary economic beneficiaries at this point in time. So I just thought that it's important that I actually say that so that we are able to deal with. Also, I hope, I must say this also, Karima, because some people abuse this freedom. That, because we are free, we can say whatever we like, then we can say everything is possible anyhow. We call that populism. If I'm in front of workers, I tell workers you're going to earn 20,000 rands a week, and they clap hands, they are happy. But I know that's actually, it's not going to happen. That's abuse of freedom of expression. The point I'm trying to make is that these challenges that we have require us to understand that freedom is not an event. Freedom is a process, but it's not only a process, it's a struggle, which is what is most important. How do we organize then to make sure, as I said at the beginning, that we complete this incomplete freedom? We do agree. But because it's incomplete, then we can't say all the things I've mentioned, they do not matter. That is the point, I think, that also needs to be made.
Okay, Dr. Nzimande, I want to ask you to come to the policy questions that you decided on that got us to where we are, but I'm not part of the debate, so I'm going to moderate this debate, and I'm sure that is exactly where Eusebius would probably want to start. Eusebius, your response.
Absolutely, Karima. You talk about contradictions. That's the kind of terminology that old Marxists love to use as an excuse for being inconsistent. So I want to point out a couple of inconsistencies. Dr. Blade Nzimande has got an awkward positionality in this debate. He is part of an ANC-led government that has signed up for neoliberalism, and he's also, proudly so, and he's also a communist who presumably is not very proud of the economic cluster that have rolled out some very anti-poor, anti-black neoliberal economic policies over the past 25 years. I'm going to come to that in a second. I want to rebut the minister more directly. You see, where many young people and many opposition politicians, and again there's overlapping consensus, Dr. Nzimande, between us, we don't disagree completely, which is one of the reasons why you're one of my favorite Marxist interlocutors, Karima as well. But the areas where we disagree are important. So let me just say where I agree with you. The things that you list as achievements from the point of view of developmental outcomes are enormously important. And only a wealthy person or a glib middle-class suburbanite will not appreciate the difference that, for example, 7 million people being on social grants make to their existence. As someone who comes from a family of many poor people, people living under conditions of poverty, we shouldn't say poor people, it's not their identity, I appreciate that. thank you for reducing the burden of black tax with the social grants in our communities and many of our families that need it. The 1.6 million beneficiaries of higher education, I appreciate that fact. The 7 million houses as well. But you know what the ANC love to do? They like to list the things that are truisms about what they've done without the detail. 7 million people watching this debate on eNCA right now have had electrification, Karima. It means nothing when Eskom can't give you electricity. When you have energy insecurity because an SOE has been hollowed out because of looting sponsored by the ANC-led state, it doesn't matter that in theory I have a mud structure that could give me electricity to get my master's degree. However, the SOE is incapable of delivering. And that is the story of each one of the steps that he has given me. I can take another example. You talk about 17 million people being on social grants, many in my family. That is a fantastic thing. But tomorrow, if I die and I can't send remittances to the Eastern Cape or the Western Cape, many of them would not be self-sufficient because your grant system doesn't ask the question, how do we get them to be the authors of their own life rather than simply being subject of a benevolent state? So the story of social grants is double-sided. On the one side, it shows a government that is genuinely caring, that cares about deep inequality, but it's also in its design and detail, Dr. Nzimande, a story of a government that doesn't take seriously the question, how do we really emancipate people economically so that they cannot be dependent on the state habitually over many decades?
Dr. Nzimande, I think it's a fantastic point to get back to the question of policy choices.
Yes.
Now, you said that you had an unfunded mandate in your rebuttal to Eusebius, and I agree, because you inherited a bankrupt state. Alistair Sparks wrote a brilliant book about that. But you chose a set of policies at the time, despite that limitation, that didn't necessarily get you out of that created perhaps a greater debt burden. And one of it is, for example, the fact that we chose to have an arms deal over free compulsory education. So can you explain the policy choices of this unfunded mandate? So there's a recognition that the state was bankrupt, that you were new at governance, but you had the decisions to make. Why did you not choose free education in 1994?
Good luck, Dr. Nzimande.
No, we did. Interestingly enough, Karima, I was listening early hours of this morning on 702 on a brilliant interview of Dr. Nelson Mandela the week after the Shell House shootings. You know, it was excellent. He was articulating 10 years of compulsory education. We did that. You know, we said first 10 years is compulsory, and large parts of it actually, by the way, was free. Not all of it, I do agree. There were still very expensive schools that were actually charging fees, but we've progressively said, even in those schools, children who come from poor families cannot actually be excluded. I've said, if we look at the past, by the way, this thing of only talking about the past 9 years, it's fine, but it's not adequate, because there were mistakes also. I'm not defending the last 9 years, don't misread me, but there were things that were done wrong also prior to that. One of those was the adoption of the GEAR policies. But it was a struggle. You know, that's how we understood it as communists. Eusebius is criticizing that I've got this Janus face because I'm a communist and as ANC. It's not. We understand exactly that we're in a broad movement. There are always struggles inside that movement itself about the policies, and they are democratically decided, and then those policies that win, we will continue to struggle. We managed to win the debate at the end, that it was wrong. Even Eskom, by the way, Eskom comes from that era. We knew in 1997 that we had to invest, you know, in our coal-powered stations and so on. We didn't, because there was a plan to actually privatize most of the state. That is part of the problem that we face. I don't want to deny that part of the Black House is because of the theft that has happened at Eskom. Then at least also we have a president like President Ramaphosa, who has actually stood up and said, where we were wrong, we will admit that we were wrong, and we are actually going to act as he's actually acting now. And we hope that all South Africans will actually support that, so that we are able to deal with all these problems. So the issue of policies, what we need, I think we did try to do some corrections. We must not rule out on this. For instance, between 2009 and 2014, R1 trillion was invested into infrastructure. That was very important because that cushioned us in many instances. But also we must remember that our economy, we can't just also only be blaming individuals, has two key constraints. It's global, that we are operating, we are a subsidiary economy in a global economy, which it has got crisis, has got implications for us. We also were in the SADC region. South Africa is not an island. Part of these problems we are talking about, xenophobia and so on, are just manifestations of a deeper problem. That SADC actually has become a labor reservoir for South African capital in the main. So all those are external factors that we have to factor in if we are to then develop policies that are actually appropriate so that we understand the totality of our context.
Eusebius, I'm going to give you a chance to rebut some of the issues, and then I'm going to open the floor for discussions. I'm sure many of you have really interesting questions. I myself have interesting questions, but I will keep those things to myself and allow the debate to continue. But Eusebius, please pick up on some of the issues that you disagree with or agree with Dr. Nzimande on.
Yeah, Dr. Nzimande said that what we need now is a recognition, and certainly that the ANC as a movement recognizes, that we need, quote, a second, more radical phase. And I've got a problem with that idea, because there was nothing that stopped the ANC simultaneously dealing with civil and political rights, entrenching them from 1994, and at the same time dealing with an economy that is exclusionary, that is unjust, that is racist. So this idea of we need 50 years to deal with one set of issues, and then women's rights, gay rights can come later, and then maybe poverty down the line, that's nonsense. The historical burden that you have as a government is to simultaneously and irreducibly deal with the complexity of challenges that you have. And I want to keep it practical. Dr. Nzimande and I both like theorizing, but for sake of a focused debate, take the example of MTN and Vodacom, and the connection between a lack of access to cheap data and our civil and democratic rights that we want to entrench, Karima. The connections are now clear. You can't be a successful job seeker in 2019 if you don't have data. You can't be an informed citizen taking Karima's participatory model of democracy seriously and acting it if you don't have data. And yet, when I talk about the monopoly that the state has on policy formulation and lawmaking, nothing has stopped the ANC-led government from deciding to be anti-poor, to be pro-poor, pro-working class, and regulating how corporates like MTN and Vodacom behave in terms of their business model, siphoning off super profits, and we in effect end up cross-subsidizing cheap data on the rest of the continent. That's what I'm talking about. Dr. Nzimande is disingenuous to then talk about, well, some of this has to do with externalities, as if the global economy explains our own lack of ability or willingness, rather, because it's about political will, to go after our own companies. When he talks about what are corporate citizens doing, they're not in this debate. You know that if the CEOs were here, you and I talk to them all the time as political analysts behind closed doors. We take them on for their own agentive power that they have and they don't use to make the world a better place. But you are here as a representative of the state. It's mind-boggling to me that the government welcomes the Competition Commission saying that these companies are effectively being anti-poor in their behavior when you have a monopoly in the state to do something about it. The same with the bread cartel, the construction industry. So when I critique the state, I'm talking about the direct constitutional power that you have and that you have not used to make sure that we are truly economically free.
Who would have thought a liberal would argue that capital needs to be disciplined, and Eusebius just did that. So yes, we are indeed dealing with contradictions, and I disagree with him. I do think contradictions do get us forward. Dr. Nzimande, a quick response from you, and then we're going to open it to our listeners. I just want to remind those of us who are watching at home, you are of course watching a live debate at the Apartheid Museum. We're talking about a quarter of a century of freedom, and we're evaluating the quality of that freedom and whether we are indeed truly free. Dr. Nzimande, quickly.
It's interesting what the sort of admission by Eusebius actually. He says we talk to the captains of industry. behind closed doors. Why are you talking to them? And to us as government, you're talking to us in the public. Engage them in public. So it says what I'm saying, sort of this liberal diving. Blame the state, keep the others who are also doing wrong things and actually do not blame them. I can say insofar as Vodacom and MTN, we set up the Competition Commission and it's doing its work. That's why we should welcome it. And I can say now, without fear of contradiction, we are going to deal with these big monopolies. We are going to bring down the price of data, for instance.
But what stopped you?
Do that.
What stopped you in a quarter of a century?
We have started doing these things and all these measures that we have. We are prepared to consider, yes, we could have done more. We did not do more for a variety of reasons. I don't want also to be seen to be looking too much backward, but also corruption really has been a very big factor in our ability. It's like this thing of changing ministers every second night. There has been like...
Well, we thought the night changes would change
to be appointed,
with Ramaphosa, but it didn't. They start happening in the evening.
There are mistakes that we committed. On the front, for instance, of the digital age, we are in the dark ages in South Africa at the moment, not least because we wanted to push very selfish, narrow interest in this space at the expense of radical transformation. But what I'm saying now is that watch this space. We're going to bring down the price of data. We're going to advance much quicker than we've been able to do in terms of digital transformation.
You can see that the minister is in election mode. The vote is a couple of days off from now, so we're going to hold Dr. Nzimande to that promise and the state. But let's use this opportunity to open the floor for discussions. We've got roving mics moving around. So can I have the first 4 hands, please? And can I get the mics to the people? So we'll start with women first. We are the majority of the electorate, so we are going to give women an opportunity to take their rightful place. Then we have, in fact, 2 more women here on this side, and then we have a gentleman here in front. So those will be our first 4 participants. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eleanor Williams, and I'm not representing an organisation or entity. I'm here in my capacity as a private individual. And my question is for Eusebius. You have spoken at length so far about the ANC and the government being anti-black and anti-poor. So what I would like to understand from you is, to what end? What is the end game of such an approach? What's the strategy behind it? Please elaborate more on your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take the other questions, then we will take them in that order. So we'll remind ourselves that Eusebius has to talk about the end game as the answer to the first question. Can I have the second respondent, please?
Hi, my name is Sister Shomani. This question is for Blade Nzimande. I voted the first time in 1994, and I think we were promised that we will get, we will be moved out of the matchboxes. But today, when I go back home to the Val, it's even worse than when I voted. We were made to clean the streets when Mandela came out of prison, but today the streets are a mess. People are falling sick. The clinics that we have that were functioning well, they are now dilapidated because the government, which is the ANC, which is running the country, is not doing anything about it. You run the policies of this country. I think you can do a lot to change it. However, you're not doing anything. You're campaigning like you're doing now, campaigning for elections. You want us to vote for the ANC. You are also selling us a corrupt mandate, a bankrupt mandate that you were sold in 1994 when you drafted that constitution. So what are you going to do to change it? And why should I vote for the ANC? Because the ANC hasn't done anything. It's actual fact, it's done a little. You can't say to me, if I ate pap and milk when I was young, now that I'm eating pap and meat, I must be excited. That means nothing to me.
Next question.
My name is Deepening, and I have a comment rather to Dr. Nzimande. First, I don't think it's honest to say he's a communist. We can debate that afterwards. I really don't think you are a communist at all. And then, secondly, I think I want us to move away from describing freedom with reference to apartheid. I was only a few months old when we voted, so I don't know what life is under apartheid. So me and my white counterpart have to have the same idea of what freedom means. And in that respect, I think the government fails dismally because they tell us about electricity. That's basic. We should have done that in the first 5 years. We can't be talking about electricity now when we've got so many problems, I can't even list them now. So I want you to then talk freedom outside of oppression, because I was never oppressed. So I'm not overly grateful for the right to vote because I was born and found that we already have that.
All right, fantastic questions. Thank you so much to our audience. I'm going to start with Eusebius. The first question was about what is the end game? To what end do you believe the ANC adopted the policy positions that it did?
Thank you for your question. It's both a wonderfully clear question but also layered. Some people will take it as a rhetorical support of Blade because they may think, I'm coming, just listen, because they may think that surely there's no self-interest in a set of policies that are anti-poor and anti-black. So let me be blunt. The end game is very simple. Eating at the trough until you explode like a fat pig. That's what it's about. It is our turn to eat. The ANC has a moral dilemma because it doesn't know how to deal with the moral rot at its core. It is anti-poor and anti-black not by design, but as a consequence of self-serving politics.
All right, there's the first clear answer. Dr. Nzimande, you've got a lot of defending to do. Let me just remind you quickly of the questions. The one is that you have to explain your communism. Now, we know the communist world has many versions of communists, but you can decide which one you want to address. But I think the key question here is government is responsible, and you've acknowledged that in the beginning. So maybe pick up on the fact that many people feel that they don't have to clap hands because we can vote, because democracy is about more than voting.
Karima, well, I don't want to debate whether I'm a communist or not. The young lady has got a right to her views. We are entitled to. I disagree with you, okay? I think you're wrong. Just like you think I'm not a communist, I also think you're wrong. So let's leave it there. We can pursue that debate at another stage, at another time. Eusebius, I think that you can criticize the ANC and its government, but to say it's anti-poor and anti-black, it's completely wrong. I disagree. All these measures I was mentioning, almost all of them exclusively, they were actually changing the conditions of poor people, poor black people, I can understand the youth which says you take electricity for granted. The reason why you take electricity for granted is because of the ANC government. The reason why we are born into electricity and better services, it's because of the ANC government. Those of us, of course, who never had electricity, we can see that the difference is big. What you take for granted didn't come for free and did not come cheap. And it's important also, by the way, for young people to bother themselves about understanding our history. You can't just dismiss the history. The Cubans put it nicely. Any nation that does not know its history does not have a future. It's very important that we actually bear that in mind. And apart from that, you will find no other organization, no matter what its weaknesses, better than the ANC on pro-youth policies. Let me just take one thing. Our youth was almost getting devastated on HIV and AIDS. We have actually rolled out what is the largest antiretroviral program in the world, and we have saved the lives of young people. And in fact, we have even increased the life expectancy over the last 10 years in particular, because of the increased provision on that. NSFAS, no one can actually say, well, what does it mean to me because I'm born now? Yes, we are born now, and we are getting what we are getting because there's been the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Many students would not, many of them, most of them, by the way, NSFAS beneficiaries, are the first to be university or college graduates in the history of their families. That's pro-youth. It's young people. Our schooling system today, it's not the past. The fact that there are hungry children today is not the past. There are hungry children today. The fact that we provide 1 meal a day in our poor schools, and it's often the only meal, by the way, for many of these poor children, not least because of your capitalist class, by the way, Eusebius, it's very convenient to just blame the state and the ANC, because then by default you end in a very problematic position of being an apologist for capitalist exploitation in this country, which still remains the principal determinant of poverty and unemployment in this country. So I think that it's important that we actually say that it may not mean much to you. You may be coming from the middle class, but for millions of poor people, I'm not here because I'm campaigning. I thought it's always nice to debate with Eusebius. He's my favorite liberal to debate with, you know.
Karima.
And for us as Marxists, it's very easy to tackle liberals sometimes. But I'm here because I think this is an important issue. And it's an important debate. Sometimes, what is good about this debate, by the way, it allows us to get a little bit deeper into the issues rather than the town hall debates where people often are more insulting each other than actually analyzing things. So that's what I would say for now, but I'll come back on other issues.
Just respond quickly. Okay, I want to be very clear as we expand this debate, and I know we've still got plenty of time. I don't, and I'm not trying to be friendly to Blade because we like each other as interlocutors. One part of this debate, as a national debate, is a debate about the ANC. One part of this debate is a debate about the state. And I'm going to be a bit dystopian, and if there's time later we can unravel it. I'm afraid the situation is more dire than what I've said. There's a poverty of ideas how to deal with our unfreedoms in our body politic. If we were talking about the EFF and the DA, I've got sharp critiques of them as well. What they have an advantage, where they have an advantage over the ANC, is that the ANC is the incumbent government. So, of course, there's a track record for us to examine very closely. But at the heart of our unfreedom is one concept: racial injustice. And there isn't one major political party in our country that have really tackled that fully and delivered particularly millions of poor black people from their injustices that we experience in our lived experiences on a daily basis. The EFF does well rhetorically, but their behavior and praxis tell you something else. The DA has got a poverty of ideas when it comes to inequality, racism, economic lack of democracy in corporate South Africa, and the corporates themselves do not give a damn about the moral duties they have to make a difference. So we are right to ask tough questions of the ANC-led government. I won't stop doing that. But all the sources of power, I'm afraid, have collectively let all of us down.